So this is the final section to the legal module, and we're going to talk about those contractual restrictions and whether or not they're too broad. And I've grouped them into two areas: in-term prohibitions and post-term prohibitions. These are the restrictions that you've set while people are, or companies are working with you and your business is active and they're active with you. And equally, post-term where they've just been let go or they've stopped working with you for any reason. And the next, I guess, couple of pages, I mean, they're going to be quite text heavy, because I'm drawing off basically what lawyers will work with as if you have a situation in any one of these situations, in any one of these classifications. So if you're in a situation where, like I had problems with misrepresentation. I had problems with people sabotaging other companies. I even got accused myself of brain draining another business in terms of the company itself. And this is a shark tactic, by the way. When it comes to, they had said no, essentially. So their top management had said, no, we're not going to sell this real estate investment that you have. So what did I do? Being the headhunter background that I came from, I actually went directly for their sales staff. So I gutted them internally. I took business level commissions where if we were paying out 8% and those sales staff would be paid like 2%, 3%, I'd go to each of them individually. So each salesperson within that company individually, and I would offer them 8% to sell. So what did they do? They stole the client bases that they were working with. They went and worked from home and they loaded my business up with about $3 million worth of new deals inside of 6 days. So for me, shark tactics, shark move. I was working between two different countries. Very, very difficult for them to prove I did anything wrong legally. Although obviously I did massively step on some people's toes. So important for you to know this stuff, right? You got to know this stuff because that's a shark tactic I've just explained to you. It's something that you can do to force a reaction. Because you're tapping into the same thing most people respond to, either fear of loss or greed. Okay, so you're tapping into those things, you can force certain reactions. So anyway, let me get to this now. Contractual restrictions, in-term prohibitions, and post-term prohibitions. The question I'll actually pose to you on in-term was because when people are working with you, you can put a lot of restrictions on them. But do you want to? So if I'm working with another company and do I just want them selling my product? What if my product's a high ticket product? And they're only able to sell one or two of these a month. They can't grow. I mean, they like the fact that they're able to make that sale and they're taking a decent chunk of money, but they're not really reinvesting it to grow. What they need is other products. And let's say I don't have those products. Do I really want to restrict them or do I want them to actually flourish? Do I want to have restrictions in place that do not allow them to work with other companies? So it's something to think about. I'm not saying you should just go with that direction because equally, if you've got something very, very, very unique as a product idea and you don't want it tarnished with any competing products. So with real estate, it's kind of hard to do, right? But if you're selling something else, let's say merchandising, again, do you want to do it? Do you not want to do it? If you're selling shoes, do you want them to be able to sell other shoes because now you're getting a lot more looks from a larger potential consumer base, or are you selling something perhaps, say, medical, and you don't want these clinics sharing or saying that there's other stuff on the menu and you really just want them selling what you have? It really depends on what kind of business you run. It depends on how you want to basically operate your own company and have these other entities work with you. Post-term prohibitions, we're going to go over that right now. So let's just jump into it. Okay. So this is all about non-solicitation, right? Can they speak to someone else to come in? So can other companies come and sell to your people and have those people sell or vice versa? So there's 6 or 5 questions, I should say, that need to be sort of satisfied. Not independently, or so not all together, but independently, these things need to be looked at. So the scope of the activity, the duration of the conditions set. So how long are you setting these contractual restrictions for? Is it like a forever thing? Okay, once you've left working with me, you can never sell real estate again. Okay. Geographic area and the conditions, the geographic area, the conditions are restricting. So let's say, okay, you can't do this in a certain country because I'm there, or this state, or this territory. The legitimate business interest test, in terms of how your legitimate business interest, it really relates to your relationships and how long you've had those relationships for. And tortious interference, I mean, that's one you're going to probably get a lot of, or you're going to want to throw that one around a lot, because that's when someone steals something, or they steal your data, they steal your information, they stole your client, they turned your client away from you, they're basically speaking bad of your company, they're slandering your company. Tortious interference, we're going to cover that. So I'm going to quickly run through these now, and then we're going to conclude the legal section. Okay, so scope of the activity. The scope in non-solicitation conditions relate to pre-existing distribution network. And that's what we're really looking at. We're talking about everything here. If you Google scope of activity from a contractual standpoint, you're going to get a lot of stuff. I basically cherry-picked information that's relevant and relative to having channel partners or a distribution network in play. So more likely to hold in contrast to non-compete conditions, which usually are a lot more restrictive and don't hold up in court as much. So non-compete, which is like, I mean, you've probably seen this on TV. Maybe you've been working for a company and they say, oh, so you're selling insurance now. You cannot not compete with us after 2 years if you leave. Very, very difficult to hold a non-compete, because non-compete is industry wide, right? Whereas a scope of activity in relation to non-solicitation, because this is just about talking to people you know, it's more likely to be held up in a court of law. Okay. So a lot stronger than a non-compete. So just bear that in mind, because people will say that. They'll say, oh, if you sign our contract, here's a non-compete after. So for like 2 years, like, I'll sign it, man. It's not going to be upheld. So just bear that in mind. In the context of distribution networks, the scope relates to the non-solicitation condition, which I've just said, which prevents or stops an ex-distributor from contacting or soliciting to your business's remaining distribution channel partners. But that doesn't mean they can't talk to the new ones that you bring on. Okay. So if you built this company, let's just do it like, you built this company. These are the companies that are working with you, and you've just axed this person off. He can't talk to these companies here that are already in your network. However, the next company you take on, he can go for that one. Any of the new distributors, sub-distributors that these guys bring on, any new element in this chain can be solicited by that individual. So bear that in mind. So they can't talk to people already in the mix, but they can talk to anyone new. Pretty obvious, but sometimes not so obvious, especially when you're reading legal lingo. It's written in such a way that it's meant to be a deterrent, right? It's deterring you away from making a certain decision or taking a certain action. You've just got to know what you can and can't do. Okay. The duration of the conditions set. So sorry for all the text on this page. Let me just try and reduce the size of this thing here. Okay. A non-solicitation agreement or condition cannot be open-ended. Okay. So you can't say forever, basically. That's what that means. You wish they'd just say things in simple terms. You can't be forever. There must be a reasonable time frame for which the conditions can be in place. Usually 2 years is a good rule of thumb. Okay. So if you say you cannot work with the companies that work with me right now, you cannot talk to these clients that I have now. You can't talk to them for 2 years. I think that's reasonable. You've left our company. You had explicit information. You have a strategic advantage if you were to go straight into competing with us. So that's a good thing. In the context of distribution channel networks, your legitimate interest is in protecting the distributors you have in place at the time the ex-distributor leaves. And again, this doesn't apply to the new distributors. Okay. They can tag anyone. So this is just really reinforcing what I just said. Okay. Now, the geographical area, I remember mentioning this with the antitrust laws, because with antitrust, a lot of times they try to lean on geography, because they initially go there, because how do you control monopolies? Normally you have to kind of put a boundary on it, right? So this kind of relates to that. So this relates to the express geographical territorial description, the conditions are referring to or is referring to. So if you're just saying in America, you can't do anything in, that's America, but you can't work with, anyone in New York. All right. So however, the geographical limitations are extremely difficult to enforce today. So how are you going to stop someone from selling real estate in New York or whatever your product is, or any competing or simple? How are you going to do that? It's very, very difficult. And here, pull this right out of, I think this is Find Law or something. The law in the US and most other countries has now recognized that the conditions applying to restrictive conditions on geographical limitations is not cut and dry and not in keeping with reality, which basically means they recognize that you can go on the internet and sell to anyone, anywhere. And it's also hard for you to control where, it's hard for you to control where your customers come from. I'll give you an example specifically. Do you remember I was telling you about my private equity company? And this is really just talking about geographical limitations. Regulation D, Reg D 506C, which allows me to generally solicit to any US person in America. And then I also got Regulation S. I got compliant with Regulation S for anyone offshore. The funny and crazy thing about this was that no one offshore could respond to an advertisement or marketing material that was under the compliancy of Regulation D506C. And equally, anyone who was looking in the US couldn't see, as far as the documents are concerned, anything that had the Reg S, the Regulation S, legend or mandated legend at the bottom of it. And it was really just the same brochure. It was the same operating agreement. It was the same everything, the same website, except with just two different disclaimers at the bottom. But we had to set up restrictions so no one outside of the US can view this site. So if they type in usparkinginvestments.com, they will be redirected to the offshore site if they're coming in from servers from a different country. And I mean, that's an example of that's working with the SEC. When you're working with the SEC, you've got to just bend over and do what they say. But as far as competition is concerned and just generally competing in the market there and having people solicit and non-solicit to people that you're working with, you're not going to really be able to pull in the geographical restrictions that strongly. So if you're trying to put that in your contracts, or if that's in a contract that someone's thrown in front of you saying, well, you can't work here, you can throw that back in their face. So just bear that in mind. Legitimate business interest test. And again, this is the length of time about the relationship that you have. So how long the distributors have had a pre-existing relationship with you? All those companies, how long have they been working with you for? How much money was invested in acquiring them? Something interesting to prove. Imagine that in a court of law. Well, we've spent this much money in building this network, and that guy's coming in and just poaching them all. How could it affect the future business of that pre-existing distributor? Is it by taking all of these companies, is it going to destroy me that now you're working with them? Or if I've stolen someone else's, or I say stolen a lot. What I'm saying is if I decide if I'm selling shoes and I just go for that shoe manufacturer's downline, so the companies that they have exclusive arrangements with that are wholesaling for them, which are hard to find, right? Or hard to get into. If I've managed to negotiate my way in and I now have that wholesaler taking on huge amounts of my shoes and then now distributing it to these different companies and I'm maintaining those relationships. And then that pre-existing company throws me a lawsuit and says, hey, you're competing with us and here's our legitimate business interests. And this is the reason why we deserve some kind of compensation for you. This is where this kind of stuff comes into play. And the truth of the matter is, it's very difficult. But if you are someone who has been doing this for quite some time, if you build up a network and you've been going strong for a few years, that's what the lawyers or the judge or everyone's going to be looking at, is how long the relationship existed for. Because they don't really care how much money you put into it. All right? They don't. I mean, they say they're going to qualify it, but in reality, they don't really care. How much contact has been there? That's another one. Have you just taken on this big network and then that was it? They've just worked with you forever. Or do you have this long-standing relationship, personal relationship with all these different entities? The truth is, by the way, you end up having very, very strong relationships, because they're all people. These aren't remember, these aren't websites. These are companies. Yeah, this is not you having a product going to website 1, website 2, website 3 and selling it on those websites. I'm talking about business 1, business 2, business 3, and you having agreements with them where there's commission splits or fee splits and real incentives for them to push your products out there for you. You end up talking with them. You meet with them. You speak with them. So bear that in mind. The length of that relationship and how big you can prove that really, really comes into play if you're ever going to end up in a legal situation. Something good to know. Tortious interference as far as common law. This is the one you're probably going to have most fun with. I say fun. Either you'll be throwing this out at people or you'll be probably getting this. Especially when you've got a bigger network, when you've got like 100, 200 different companies with like staff numbers of around 30 to 50 each of those companies. You're talking, a lot of people there, a lot of competing interests, and tortious interference as far as the US is concerned can come up. So it's about the legal restrictions on someone being able to use improper or wrongful. Now, remember I spoke about improper? Wrongful is the bad one. Acts of fraud. Remember the old Godfather sequence where he said either your brains or your signature will be on this contract by the time I leave this office? Kind of situations like that. Threats of coercion, defamatory statements. So if the people are just slandering or saying bad things about your company, slander, misrepresentations about your products. Oh, don't buy that food, that canned food from that company because there's nails in it and stuff. And if it's not true, that can be, that you can throw tortious interference on them, sue them. Services management. Exposing lies about your financial standing. That happens a lot in the financial space. If you're selling real estate investments, if you're building, if you actually look at some of the more prominent, real estate moguls out there right now, you'll see this is something that they're getting hit with a lot. Much like I did when I was with my private equity company, when I first started it. When I'm managing these properties that investors have paid into, my competitors are marketing out to or talking to, maybe my current investors or potential buyers who are going to look at us. And they were saying things like, oh, but they're not funded well. That company, they're not pulling in enough money, or the profit ratios aren't good enough for that specific project that you're looking at. It's all untrue because they don't know, because they're not part of it and they don't have access to the financial resources that we have, or the financial statements that we have, because they're not exactly publicly displayed. They're given to our investors and we know where information's been going. So you get a lot of that. You get a lot of people, because that's it. They just want what you have and they're trying to play in the same sandbox you are. And of course, people do things, that are wrongful as far as collecting your clients or trying to get into your channel partners or people that you want to work with. So that will come up. It's not like it's not going to come up. It will come up. So be prepared for it. You don't have to, this entire legal section is really just to give you an indication of what's to potentially come. And the chances of it actually occurring are going to be pretty high once you get started. And I'm not saying that you need to revert back to this to be what you lean on as far as dealing with that, but it's probably more like, now that you know it, it's been said it once, it's sat in your head. Now you're going to go back. We're going to move into advertising and how to find distributors. But you're going to at least know this. And in practice, and in practical terms, when you're out there, you'll know when it's time to call a lawyer. You'll know when it's time to actually take something seriously, or whether or not you have real legs to stand on if you're looking to take action on someone else. Is the threat of tortious interference, is it strong enough? Or are you just going to end up wasting money on pulling in a lawyer that you don't need? Or it's really me kind of just laying the land for you, giving you the lay of the land for a minute. But, like I say, let's move on. Let's get into the good stuff. We're going to talk about advertising next. And then after advertising, we're going to go straight into, we're going to go into how to find your distributors, because remember, I've said it a few times, right? The first place you want to go is go to your competitors, but then how do you find the new ones? Or how do you find more of those competitors or more of those types of distributors? So that's what we're going to get into now, is how to actually get started. So I'll see you in the advertising section next.